And welcome everyone. I guess it's your Tuesday morning, my Monday afternoon. So welcome. Glad you were able to take a little bit of time out of your day to spend with us on this webinar. This is part two of our three-part series of maximizing configuration manager for the modern world. And in part two, we're going to talk about managing Windows 10 migrations. So if you recall in part one, we went ahead and spent a little time talking about what was new in Configuration Manager, and I talked about 1702 real quick and concentrated on 1706, and then talked about how the Cireson portal for Configuration Manager may help you out. So what we want to talk about in today's session is how do you get to Windows 10 and then how you do some management with that. So my name is Wally Mead. I'm a Principal Program Manager with Cireson. I've been with Cireson a little over, right around 3.5 years, I guess now. After spending 22 plus years at Microsoft in the systems management space. So started with Systems Management Server and then moved on to Configuration Manager when that was the renamed version of SMS. So been around for a long time, and I'll be walking you through the presentation and demonstrations today. We're co-presenting this or co-sponsoring this session with Dilignet, our partner over there in the Australia area. So thanks to them for helping out and being our co-sponsor here. A couple of housekeeping notes for you. You guys are all in listen-only mode, so you're not going to be able to verbally ask any questions. However, if you do have questions, which I highly encourage you to go ahead and ask questions, please go ahead and type them in the GoToWebinar interface in the questions area. And please put some context around it because I won't be hitting these questions till the end of the presentation, and I won't necessarily know what you're asking in an hour when I get to the questions unless you give a little context around it. But please do ask questions, and there will be time at the end of the presentation to cover all those questions. So this session is being recorded. It will be up on our Vimeo channel, which is Vimeo, vimeo.com/Team Cireson, all one word. And you can go there later on this week, possibly tomorrow, if not on Wednesday, so Thursday your time, and get that presentation, the recording, and hop on it there and listen to it again if you want to, or pass it on to any of your coworkers that might have not had a chance to attend this live as you guys are. So it is being recorded, and I will record the questions session as well. So with that, let's go ahead and get into it. So the first topic is getting to Windows 10. So since we're talking about Windows 10 migrations and management of it, you need to be able to get to Windows 10 before you can manage it with Configuration Manager or whatever your platform is. So let's talk about this. Now, we only have an hour total for this presentation, which includes some CMP stuff. And I did a three-part webinar series, which was recorded and is up on the Vimeo site on migrating to and managing Windows 10. So it's going to be hard to get this down into the one session type time frame, but we'll do what we can to get you guys moving along. So the first thing to think about is, do you want to do an operating system replacement or an operating system upgrade? Those are two different options, and you go about them a little bit differently within Configuration Manager as to how you approach this. You're still going to use a lot of the same objects in Config Manager, but there are a little bit of differences there. So first off, if you're going to do a replacement, it's good if you want to do a fresh start. So if you don't like the way things are installed right now, you have problems with it, you're not sure about your hard drive and its configuration or files and corruption and whatever, replacement is a good scenario. It's good for a new hard disk partitioning scenario. So if you want to go from BIOS to UEFI, or if you just want to go from one big flat partition to multiple different partitions, that's a good scenario as well. You do have to reinstall all your apps and recreate your data. Now, as far as the data goes, you can use USMT, which is the user state migration tool, which comes part of Configuration Manager when you have the ADK installed appropriately, which is a requirement for Config Manager. In-place upgrade is Microsoft's recommended recommended way to get to Windows 10. I was trying to decide whether to say recommendation or recommended. So recommended. So recommended method to get to Windows 10. It's a great way of getting from Windows 7, Windows 8, Windows 8.1 over to a Windows 10 platform. It allows you to change your mind or revert within 30 days of the upgrade. So if you try it, you don't like it, it saves off your old OS and it can replace it for you. It does keep all your apps and data, and it's generally a faster process as there's fewer actions that are needed to complete to get to the new operating system. Now, as far as Configuration Manager goes, we'll spend a couple of moments talking about the environment, and I'll show you these things, and I'm going to get over my demo in a few minutes. So site systems that are used for operating system deployment. Obviously, you need to have your site server, a site database server. Those are necessary, obviously, for a site at all. Management point, the client's going to get policies from the management point as per normal, and a distribution point because it's got to get content, and that content's going to be your operating system image information. You'll likely want a PXE-enabled distribution point, assuming you're going to be doing some bare metals. Now, if this is a migration scenario, you may not be doing PXE, but you're still going to have brand new computers you have to deploy, so PXE is still a very common method for that. So you want a PXE-enabled distribution point, and very likely a state migration point if you want to do that user state migration scenario and you are flattening the hard drive. So you need to store your state information someplace else. Network access account that's used by your clients when they're in the WinPE mode to access your content because you don't have domain credentials, and so that you're running in a local system context. Your boundary group needs to include any computers to be installed, which is especially the case and scenario if you're doing bare metal clients through PXE and getting your addresses from DHCP. Now you can do static addressing if you want to, and if you're doing an in-place upgrade, then your clients should already be in a boundary group because you have access to a distribution point. Some additional things to be aware of, obviously, to install Configuration Manager Current Branch, which is what we're talking about here, you have to have a valid Windows 10 ADK version. So just make sure that you have the proper version that you need. The more current the Windows 10 ADK is, the more support you have for newer Windows 10 operating systems. Technically, I've been told by numerous people that they've been able to deploy Windows 10 newer OSs from an older ADK, but it's not technically supported by Microsoft. And obviously, the newer version of the ADK has more bug fixes in them than older ones. And every release of the ADK has had issues with it. So in Config Manager, you'll either modify the existing boot images, or you may create your own WinPE boot images. There are two default ones, 32-bit and 64-bit, that come in Config Manager that's part of the ADK installation. You may modify them, or you can create your own custom ones, and I'll show you a custom boot image as part of the CMP and Commence solutions that we have. And you just have to make sure that these boot images are distributed to your distribution points, including PXE-enabled DPs if you're going to be doing that. Now, you got to get Windows 10 source files out to your client somehow. So the two different methods you have are either going to be operating system images or operating system upgrade packages. So operating system images will be used in the bare metal scenario. Operating system upgrade packages will be used in the in-place upgrade scenario. And I'll show you what those look like. And both require distribution to at least one accessible distribution point by any client you're trying to image. And then device drivers. As a general rule, you want to use the minimum number that you can so you're not bloating your images. But you will have to import appropriate device drivers into your what Config Manager calls a driver library to have them available either for plug and play analysis or just directly inserting via a driver package, or some people use packages and programs to go ahead and deploy images that way as well. But just figure out which device drivers you need based on your hardware platforms, get those prepared. And then what ties all these things together is something called a task sequence. So the task sequence is the final piece of the puzzle. They specify a boot image to use, an operating system image, or an operating system upgrade package, drivers, driver packages, possibly other software you want, whether they're packages and programs or applications, as well as software updates. They also designate what domain you want to join. So a series of commands that are in those task sequences that specify what boot image to load, how to partition the hard drive, whether to configure it for BIOS or UEFI, what operating system image or operating system upgrade package to go ahead and implement, what drivers to install or auto-detect those drivers, what domain to join, what software to install, whether or not you're going to back up the user state and then load it later on. So a lot of different commands in there. So that's really what a task sequence is. It's just a script that tells the computer, I was going to say client, but it's not a client yet, unless it's an existing computer, the existing client, what to do to get there. Now, once you know your upgrade targets, if you're doing an upgrade scenario, you can deploy the task sequence to a collection of those target systems. And in a couple of slides, I'll talk about a great way of finding your upgradable clients. If this is a bare metal scenario, then you can go ahead and target to the all unknown computers collection or some other collection appropriate for you. Now, this slide talks about a way, a pretty decent way of going through and performing an upgrade assessment to finding out which clients or which computers you have available that are able to be upgraded. So the easiest way to do this is use a built-in option in Windows 10. It's a checkbox in the in-place upgrade task sequence. And it says to perform Windows setup compatibility scan without starting upgrade. Basically what that does when the task sequence runs, it runs the Windows setup with a command line switch of /compat scan only. And so it will run Windows setup, but without really installing, just to check to see if the Windows 10 setup program thinks that the existing hardware would be applicable to be upgraded to Windows 10. Now, when it runs, it's going to create an exit code, and that exit code is going to be your indicator of your upgradability. And at the bottom of the slide, I have some of the common return codes. And obviously what you want is the top one, no compatibility issues found or success. And it comes back as that hex message there, and you convert that into decimal. And then there's other ones that say, hey, you have compatibility issues, not enough free disk space, not eligible, or whatever. Now, the downside is that this doesn't really create a report for you. All you get is the status back in your log file on the client. So you have to analyze those log files to figure out what's going on. So you can create your own full task sequence. So use the full task sequence or create a custom one with just that action if you want to. And then I think this is my last slide, then we'll jump into a demo and I'll show you some of this stuff. So once you're in the process of you've done all that other stuff and you've now figured out what clients you can upgrade or how you want to deploy a task sequence, then you can go ahead and do your work. So verify that all the content that you're going to be making available to these clients has been distributed to at least one accessible distribution point that the clients will have access to. Then use the deploy action to target that task sequence to your targets. Now, when you deploy operating system images, task sequences, you'll get involved with what's called risky deployment notification feature that was added way back in ConfigMan 2012. I believe it was R2. They added this feature, maybe it was SP1. So all your built-in collections, except the all unknown computers collection, will be blocked from use when you do this operating system upgrade, and you'll see that momentarily. Now, obviously, all unknown computers is there specifically for the purpose of deploying operating system images, so that one is not blocked. It also does hide by default any of your custom tasks, custom collections that have more members in them than an ad administrator configured or set value. And by default, that value is 100. So any collections that you would have created that have at least 100 members in them would not appear in the wizard when it runs. Although you can clear the checkbox and then that will show you all your collections. So you pick your target collection, you pick the purpose, required or available, you pick your availability, you pick the schedule, you pick your user experience settings and so on, and get that task sequence deployed. Okay, let's show you what these things look like. I know I'm going through this rather quickly, but that's just because of the amount of time that I have or don't have. So here's my configuration manager environment that we can see. And I'm on the distribution points, and you can see I've got 2 distribution points in my environment. But if I scroll off to the right, only one of them is enabled for Pixie. So when I'm doing Pixie deployments, I'll only be able to utilize one of those 2 different distribution points. Now, if we talk about the other aspects that we referenced, if I go real quickly here, we go to our sites node, and then I go to my Site components and software distribution. Here's my network access account, which I do have one. I just named mine NAA for network access account. So I have it. If I look at my boundary groups, my boundary group that I'm using does have an IP address range in it, which is my full subnet. And my DHCP server has got a scope of 192.168.5.200 up to 210. So it is covered by my boundary group, so the clients would have access to my content based on the network access account and then the boundary group. Now, specifically for operating system imaging, if I go to software library, here, operating systems, here's my boot images. So the top two are the built-in ones that come in Configuration Manager. The bottom one is a custom boot image I'll show you. And some of the things you might want to implement in a custom boot image, you might want to go to the customization tab. In this case, I've got a preloader. So I'm going to load a front end that I'll talk about shortly and designate where those files are. You might also go in there and load some specific drivers that you need. Hopefully you don't have to load any drivers in a boot image because you can load too many and it bloats your image and causes problems, but try to get by without any drivers at all. Optional components is a very common thing that people would go ahead and implement. In this case, we've loaded the WinPE.net support outside of what was already loaded. And all you do is click the New button here and then pick which component you want and then add it into your image and save it, and it will go ahead and update your source. Now, another thing that's very important for you to do for custom boot images, if you're doing PXE, is select this checkbox on the Data Source tab, deploy this boot image from the PXE-enabled distribution points. If you don't do that, then you won't be able to use this custom boot image from a PXE scenario. It is enabled by default on your default boot images, so just on the custom ones where it is not enabled by default. So I got my boot images, and you can see that they are distributed or out to my distribution point. Then you go ahead and create an operating system image. In this case, I've got one for Windows 10 Enterprise, and all you do there is point it to your source files. And in this case, I'm just pointing to the install.wim file that comes in Windows 10. So I'm going to Windows 10 sources, then install.wim. That's using a bare metal or bare bones operating system image from, in this case, Windows 10 that Microsoft would provide. You can also do a capture process and create your own WIM file and name it whatever you want to. So I've got that created, and it's also distributed out to my distribution point. I've also created an operating system image for an in-place upgrade. Now that uses a different set of source files. So if I go to the source location, you can see it is just using the source. It's not pointed all the way down to install.wim, so it's using that full set of flat files that you would get from your ISO from the volume license servicing site, or that you would get on a physical media if you're using that. So I have those set up. So you'd import any drivers that you want. You'd get your OS image, operating system upgrade packages. I got my boot images. Now I tie things all together with a task sequence. So here's a task sequence to do a bare metal deployment. And if I go look at that, here's all the commands. It's going to go ahead and capture my current user state. It's going to capture my Windows settings, capture my user state, reboot into WinPE, and it designates in the task sequence itself properties. It tells it what boot image to use. It's going to verify whether it can do BIOS or UEFI. If it can do UEFI, it's going to. It's going to then apply the operating system from this image, Windows 10 Enterprise. Reapply my Windows settings, apply my device drivers, install Configuration Manager Client Agent, then it's going to do a restore the user state. So pretty standard. That's a pretty short task sequence, honestly. If you get into USMT, then it does go ahead and get things a little bit more complicated because you have a lot more commands in there to go through. Now let me go ahead and show you an in-place upgrade task sequence, which by default is going to be a whole lot shorter. So if I go ahead and set these side by side, you'll see that the bare metal deployment is a whole lot more complicated, not that this is long, than the in-place upgrade, which is going to check to make sure that I'm a client OS, I have enough memory, I have enough processor speed. Then I'm going to go ahead and do an upgrade of the operating system, and it's going to run a built-in Windows command. Now here's that one checkbox we were talking about. If you want to do the compatibility scan, you just go ahead and enable this one checkbox, And then when you deploy this task sequence, it would just do the scan to detect your readiness for upgrading to Windows 10 without really doing that upgrade itself. But I'm going to do the upgrade. It's going to restart the computer, and then that's it. That's the only 3 commands that are in this task sequence. So it's a whole lot simple to go through. Now, before you deploy the task sequence, you would go ahead and go to the References tab down here at the bottom and just verify that all the content referred to by this task sequence is available on the distribution point. And my upgrade to Windows 10, all it refers to is the Windows 10 source or the operating system upgrade package we looked at earlier, and it has been deployed. My in-place upgrade task sequence is referring to a boot image, the configuration manager client installer, the USMT package, and then the Windows 10 Enterprise install.wim file. And all that content has been distributed out to a distribution point. Then all you do is create a deployment. So here's the deployment that I have for Windows 10 deployments. You can see it's a required task sequence. It's going to a collection called Windows 10 deployments, whereas your upgrade, you'd just go ahead and deploy that. So if I just show you that risky scenario, if I do a deploy on this guy, as soon as I click Browse, it says, hey, this has the potential to be a high-risk deployment. We're going to go ahead and remove some of your collections. Not remove them, but just hide them for you. So now you can see that you don't see all systems, you don't see all desktop and server clients, you don't see all mobile devices, which you can't deploy to anyway. All you see is your custom collections. Now you can see in my case, I changed the qualifier here to 2. So right now I only have 4 collections. If I go ahead and clear that checkbox, now it adds a couple more collections in, and you can see the member count, a couple of them had 3. Now again, the default is 100. I just changed that just so you could see what that process was. So you just pick what your collection is, like all workstations, and then you would designate whether it's going to be available or required. In this case, since it's an in-place upgrade, only going to existing configuration manager clients, and you just walk through and configure all your other settings. And here it says, hey, you've got more than 2 resources, so just verifying you really want to do this. So select the yes, I do want to continue on. And that'll create an out of status message so somebody would know that you did this. And then give it your schedule and move on, which you guys have all seen before. All right, so that's pretty much the process through Configuration Manager of doing your work. So get your environment prepared. So site server, distribution point, Pixie enable that distribution point if you're going to be using Pixie. Then you go ahead and obviously have a management point. So you get your site infrastructure, but you hit Pixie distribution point. If you want to do state migration and do machine replacement or wipe the hard drive, then you want to have a state migration point as well. Then you have import whatever drivers you need, create your boot images or modify the existing boot images. Oh, one other thing that's very, very common to do in testing scenarios, not necessarily for deployments, is to go in there and enable this one checkbox I didn't show you. Enable command support testing only. So this is good when you're first testing out your boot images, so that if something fails, when you're WinPE mode, you can press the F8 key and it will take you to a command prompt and you get the log files from that computer that you're trying to do your imaging on. If you don't do that, then if it fails, it normally has a timer of like 3 minutes and it reboots automatically and you lose access to those log files. So that's a good thing to enable as far as customizing your boot images. Outside of the optional components or the drivers that we talked about earlier. So get your boot images, make sure they're distributed. Again, if it's custom, also make sure that you've gone in there and set the deploy from Pixie enabled distribution points. Otherwise, you're not going to have any access to that from your DP. Then either go to the install.wim like I did, or capture your own existing Windows 10 client and import that captured image, capture your WIM file as a operating system image, or go and create an operating system upgrade package. Now that could be, in my case, it's 1511, but it could be 1607, could be 1703, could be 1709. So you may have additional operating system upgrade packages for each different build or release of Windows 10 that you want to go ahead and deploy through this in-place upgrade process, which is also very handy for keeping yourself up to date, which I'll show you another way more in a little bit. And then create your task sequence, deploy that task sequence, and you're off and running. Okay, I think 1 or 2 more slides, and we'll get back in another demo. So once you've done your deployment of your task sequence, then there's 2 main methods of monitoring: in place or in console monitoring through the monitoring workspace, the deployments node. Select the task sequence, do a run summarization, then click view status. And when you're in that view status, click more details, and you'll be able to see full step-by-step status details. And I'll show you that later on once I got a deployment going, which we don't have obviously right now. Or if you want, you can do reporting. And there are 28 reports related to task sequencing. So you can go ahead and look at the status summary of a specific task sequence deployment from the task sequence deployment status folder. That's a great one to start with. And that will get you moving along with your task sequence processing. So I'll show you that once I get a little bit further on. So right now, there's nothing here to look at as far as the monitoring deployment status. So we'll look at that momentarily. So now, I wanted to throw this slide in there. You might have heard of something Microsoft just released called Autopilot, or at least they're just releasing. Now this, some people think of this as a competitor to Configuration Manager, but really it's targeted to a different audience. So if you already have Configuration Manager, there wouldn't really be much of a need for you to consider Autopilot. Autopilot is going to be more targeted to smaller environments that aren't Configuration Manager shops. So basically what you do, it's a Microsoft Intune feature that you could use to deploy Windows 10, and I believe it only works with 1709, which the fall creators update. So your hardware vendor would go ahead and register your computer ID into Intune via a hash for you. And then you go into the Intune console portal and you configure your policies, your accounts, what software you want to install from the store, your profiles, and so on through the Intune portal. Then when the user gets their hardware that's been hashed up into Intune from the vendor, they turn on the computer, answer a couple questions, region, account name, and so on, to register their system in Intune, and then it receives those policies. It matches the computer information with the hash that's been loaded by your vendor, and it starts the deployment process through Microsoft Intune. So the operating system gets set there that way. So again, it's for smaller environments where you're going through Intune, you're not managing through Configuration Manager. There we go. Okay, now once you've got Windows 10 deployed, you now want to manage it. So the cool thing is that to keep Windows 10 up to date, you have a couple different ways of going about this. You can use the Windows 10 dashboard, which I'll show you in just a second. That will give you a view into your Windows 10 population, the number of clients you have with different builds deployed, the lifespan of each build, how many clients have already expired or nearing their end of life. You can then create servicing plans to automatically deploy new builds of Windows 10. So very much it's based off of the automatic deployment rule engine that you guys are familiar with from software updates. So very, very familiar with that and based off of that syntax and processing. So you'd basically create an ADR to go ahead and say, I want to deploy 1709 to this pilot collection 3 days after it releases using these parameters. And I want to deploy 1709 after 30 days after it's been declared current branch for business to this set of collections and so on. So that just helps you to do that automatic deployment process. Some people like that, some people don't like it. It seems to be the most common scenario is people will create a new task sequence to deploy a new operating system upgrade package to keep their devices up to date and use the normal task sequencing process to get there. Now your normal Configuration Manager client features all work on Windows 10. So all the things on the slide here, all the things that you would expect to work on a Windows 10 device still work once you've upgraded from Windows 7 or 8 or 8.1 up to Windows 10. So nothing new and unique here, just that it uses Windows Defender instead of endpoint protection that you might use in some of your older ones. Now, there are some specific features of Windows 10 that you get once you've upgraded to Windows 10 through Configuration Manager. So update and restart or update and shutdown. That's a new feature that's available for through Configuration Manager, just like you can through Microsoft Updates. So that's for updates deployed from Config Manager that require a reboot. Express updates. So instead of downloading the full cumulative update every month, you can go ahead and just do the deltas between last month's deployment and this month's deployment. Device health attestation to verify that your computer has early launch anti-malware, code integrity, BitLocker, secure boot. Now that requires that you're running Windows Server 2016 in an on-premises platform if you want to implement that on-prem. Advanced threat protection for your post-breach analysis. A bunch of compliance settings, whether you want to implement password settings or file protection, encryption, sorry, different security settings, enabling or disabling Bluetooth, Windows information protection. You can do Windows 10 Edition upgrades. So if you deployed or have Windows 10 professional environments, you can upgrade them to or convert them to enterprise just via policy. You can use Windows Store for Business to deploy software. And there's something called Universal Windows Platforms applications. So no need for sideloading keys with those. Now there's some features that you'll see in Configuration Manager that actually require Microsoft Azure. And integrate with Azure, so the cloud services, as well as some that are mobile device management functions only. So Windows Hello for Business requires an Azure account. And there's the ability of enrolling your Windows 10 devices into a mobile device management solution, so not using Configuration Manager Client Agent to manage the devices, but using Configuration Manager Console to manage as a mobile device. And there's a lot of different settings there you can see that require MDM enrollment. Now, you can't do an MDM enrollment with the Configuration Manager Client Agent installed. However, Microsoft did just announce at Ignite recently something called co-management. That lets you have a device, a Windows 10 1709, so the Fall Creators Update, client that's managed through Microsoft Intune, and configure co-management so that that client can be managed through Intune as well as Configuration Manager. And you just enable co-management through the ConfigMan console, which it's right now in technical preview 1709. So you have to wait till that comes into the production version, maybe 1710, we'll see. And then the device can have some settings configured through the Intune portal and some settings configured through the Configuration Manager console. But again, that will just be for the newest release of Windows 10. Okay, so I'll just show you a couple things here real quick, and then we'll jump on over to some different content. Okay, so once you've gone into operating system, you got your deployment going, you have this Windows 10 servicing node. So the Windows 10 servicing node is where you would see your population of Windows 10 clients and what build they're on. So you'd have different sections of this donut that would be color-coded for different builds of Windows 10. And you can see I only have one Windows 10 device out there in my environment. And then the rings, I have one ring that's release ready. I don't have any current branch for business, which is business ready. I don't have any long-term servicing branch, but it would show you the different branches out there that you would have for your Windows 10 environment. And it tells me I have one that's expiring soon. And I don't have any that's expired and no alerts. Now, if I scroll down to the bottom a little bit, it shows me my life cycle. So right now it says Windows 10 1507 is out of support. So you get the little legend up here, near end of life, and technically it is out of support. And 1511, it's getting there. So it's getting there. I think Windows has gone to 18-month support cycle, so I guess technically still supported, but it's right at the end of life for it. And then 1607 is still good to go, and 1703 obviously is release ready and business ready. So that's kind of a cool little chart to let you know, and that's where it gets the statistics up here for expiring soon or expired. Now the servicing plans, all I would do here is I'd expand this out, go to servicing plans. I don't have any. I would go ahead and create a servicing plan. And again, it's just like an ADR. So Windows 10 1709. And then go ahead and specify what target collection you want to go to, my Windows 10 clients collection. And now I just say for my current branch or current branch for business, when do I want to deploy? So I can say I want to deploy current branch 15 days after Microsoft releases it. And I want to go ahead and make sure it's English only, and just, all the normal filtering that you'd have based on your ADRs, same type of scenario. And then whether it's how soon after the deployment is kicked in, do you want to go ahead and, the timing on it, go ahead and kick that in. So the rest of it is all just like an ADR, but you're basically just stating after how long that Microsoft has released this next build, do you want to go ahead and deploy it? So you have rings for servicing plans for current branch and different rings or plans for current branch for business. So there you go. So that's But again, that's one way of keeping Windows 10 up to date. But honestly, the vast majority of people that I talk to seem to prefer creating different operating system upgrade packages for the different builds, different versions, and then just doing the normal task sequencing with an upgrade task sequence, in-place upgrade. So all you would do there is go to create task sequence and then choose this fourth option here. Upgrade an operating system from an upgrade package. So create your operating system upgrade package for 1709, and then create a task sequence here that points to that 1709 upgrade and deploy it, and use the normal task sequence engine, because you get a little more control over what's happening, and you do lose some things that you've got installed if you do the servicing plan. So more people seem to prefer right now the normal in-place upgrade task sequence process to keep their Windows platforms up to date. Okay, with that, let's go ahead and kick over to the second half of the presentation, which is how you can easily and securely migrate to Windows 10 using the Cireson portal for Configuration Manager. So I went through this in our last session a week ago, so I'll just cruise this fairly quickly. We're a software and services company, started doing services on Service Manager, found a lot of gaps, created some apps. Our customers really like those apps, so we created more and more apps, got into asset management, now Configuration Manager, have 4 free apps, and now the solution I'm going to show you, we looked at last week as well. Just some of our stats were a ton of different customers all around the world, and they like to renew with us, which is fantastic. Some of our fans or our customers, whether it's in banking or energy or sports or fashion or healthcare, government, IT, whatever it is, there's all over the world, and lots of them down in Australia. And the vast majority of our solutions all sit on top of System Center. Only have one password reset that doesn't require any System Center products. The product I'm talking about here, the Cireson portal for Configuration Manager, sits on top of Configuration Manager. So what we have is a solution here. It's a web-based console, a web-based portal that we think is going to make it very easy for your IT staff to take advantage of some of the power and features of Configuration Manager. Very, very intuitive as a web portal, and you're not tied to your installation of a Configuration Manager console. What we do is we expose the appropriate data that we feel is important for your service desk team, your desktop support team, your IT management teams, to go ahead and provide that data in an easy to use, intuitive format, so they're not having to deal with the complexities and the bulkiness of the Configuration Manager console. But you get to control who has access to what through our role-based administration. Not only do we want to expose the features and the data from Configuration Manager, we want to let you to perform some tasks like deploying software, deploying operating systems, creating computers, and so on, viewing hardware inventory. But we want to enhance those to make those easier to use. And you'll see this very clearly when I get into showing you how to create a task sequence and show you how easy it is to use the templates that we have to really define the process and help shortcut that process so you're not getting in scenarios where you forgot to set some settings. So I'll show you that in just a moment. Commence is a solution we'll talk about today, which is our OSD front end. So you guys have all done, and I'll show you this momentarily, operating system deployments before. If you do bare metal scenarios through Pixie, it's not a very intuitive interface. So you either create custom task sequences to provide that control, or use an OSD front end. We have an OSD front end that's configurable as far as security goes, and I'll show you what that looks like in just a second again. And dashboards and reporting, you obviously want to be able to tell what's going on with your deployments, whether it's software, like we'll talk about next week, or operating systems we're doing today. So we have a dashboard that gives you a high-level overview of your environment, as well as letting you pick which reports are valuable to you and only exposing those reports in the console. Okay, then personas, what we're really talking about in the OSD scenario probably is going to be the middle role, the desktop and server support teams. Those are more likely the ones that'll be doing imaging. You may expose that to your service desk analyst as well. Management, they just want to run reports. So you give them access to the CMP that just has a reporting node and just a handful of reports that they will need to use to get their job done. And users are going to be happy because your IT staff is resolving their issues more quickly. And use the config-man admin. If you don't have access to your console, you're not at your computer, you could go ahead and use the CMP to get some of your work done without having to go connect up. So let me go ahead and show you what this looks like. So first thing I'm going to do is a deployment of an OS, because you know it takes a while to do that. I want to see if we can, how far we get and get some status in this. So here's our commence front end. So it first pops up through security to make sure that we have rights to do this, because you don't want just anybody logging in and getting your your operating system images. So I'm logging in as a desktop support person. And it looks like I provided the proper name. So it's validating what components, what features that user 2 as a desktop support person has access to. So it should be popping up here in just a second with the actual commence UI to let me now interact with the bare metal deployment process. And this is going to be a bare metal deployment. Okay, I was hoping it wasn't timing out. And I'll show you the admin side in just a second. But right now, I've only given access to new workstations, and it's going to automatically designate my computer name. So we have a naming format, a sequencing that will track for you so that you have consistent names in your environment. And you can have different naming sequences based on your operating system deployment templates that I'll show you in a moment. So I'm going to create a new workstation, and this will be the first one I've created, so it's going to be WKS001. For the operating system, I'm going to go ahead and pick a task sequence and collection, and it shows me the basic information about this. You guys may have had experiences before where somebody created a task sequence, they just said new build. Okay, what's that? You don't know. Here, if they were to pick new build, it would actually tell you the operating system that was here. I want to set my UDA relationships. I'll say Wally's going to be the owner of this computer. If I have access to MDT, I can pick my OU, and I've only given access to the workstation's OU for the desktop support team, and only the workstation software. So I'll go ahead and select that to be added in. The inventory tab lets me see what the current inventory is of the computer I'm trying to image. In this case, this is my bare metal virtual machine. I can see its IP address through DHCP, its MAC address, asset tag, serial number, how much memory it has, SM bias good, and that all looks good. Now, we also do have the capability of decommissioning existing computers with commence. I'm not an existing computer, this is bare metal, so if I click decommission this computer, I don't have any hard drives here, but in an existing computer scenario, it would show me all my hard drives, and I can designate how I want to format those hard drives, quick, normal, or a secure format. Now, I don't want to decommission, I'm going to want to deploy a new OS. So click next, it gives me my summary, all looks good, click next. Now what it's doing is creating this computer account, WKS001, in Configuration Manager as a bare metal client. So it's registering it in the environment. It's now added it to the appropriate collection for that install Windows 10 task sequence, and it's retrieving the policy for that. So now what it's going to do is it says commence will exit shortly. That means commence is actually going to reboot the computer, download that WinPE boot image that's associated with that task sequence, and then get that task sequence deploying for partitioning the hard drive and doing UEFI versus BIOS and so on. So basically what we did is we gave you a front end, let you pick some options here, and then we kicked off the task sequence for you in hopefully a logical format or intuitive format anyway, that gives you an idea of what you're doing as opposed to just randomly picking things. So there you see it just was partitioning the hard drive. So commence is out of the way now. It's all just do normal Configuration Manager. Okay, so now let's show you how we did that in the config man space. So what I did was I already showed you the custom boot image, so the commence boot image, and it loaded a preloader, which I kind of showed you on the customization tab. So we're just loading this preloader, going to our commence website, and we're getting the files from this location here, and that's what that UI was that popped off. Now, we added that computer, so go to devices, here's that computer, it's added in, WKS001. We picked the install Windows 10 task sequence, which was targeted to this collection, Windows 10 deployments. You see that now I have one member of that collection. If I show members, we'll see this that same computer, WKS001, and that collection has, if we go down to the deployments node, here's the install Windows 10 task sequence that was deployed to it. So that's what's kicking off in the background right now through the commence solution. So that's kind of the Configuration Manager aspect. But in the CMP, here's what we did. So I'll just show you a couple things, and I'll show you how easy it is to create task sequences inside the CMP. So if I go to operating system deployment settings, so here's what we saw on that first page where we saw new workstations as a OSD template. And it said, so here's the template we saw as a desktop support person, and it said it was doing workstations. So it created a new computer somewhere for workstations in the range of 1 to 20. But notice I also have another template here for new servers that didn't appear. And the reason for that is if I right click and go to permissions, the desktop support team doesn't have rights to that template. So that's why you didn't see it inside commence. However, the desktop support person does have rights to the new workstations template. So that's why it was appeared. It was available. So now if I go and show you what's in there, the OSD template says it's called new workstations. It's loading the workstation numbering sequence. And here's the computer name. So WKS with 3 digits. So it's tracking those digits. And I only did from 1 to 20. So it's going to be 0, 0, 1 for the first one, which is my case. Notice that there's 2 available MDT roles, but I only gave the desktop support guy access to workstation software. We're going to assign him to CHQ, and here's the default OU as computers. But if I look at that, if I look at my OUs, you'll see that computers, the desktop support person doesn't have access to that OU. So he only had access to the workstations OU. So even though the template said to go ahead and put it in computers, when we went to the run the template as that user, it said, hey, you got to use workstations OU because that's all you have access to. And then here's the number sequencing. And there's 2 different number sequences. And the one I'm using right now is workstations. That's the one he has access to. And you see its starting range is from 1 going up to 20. And then we'll track those, what's available. And this will update here momentarily to tell me that the next starting number is going to be 2 since I've already utilized number 1. So that will go ahead and do an update and change that to 2 to 20. So I'll have 18 numbers available then. So that's kind of the CMP controls around that for the OSD template, which can designate the number sequence, and then the which is the naming format here, and then the OUs that we're utilizing. Now, what we had access to, obviously, is all the task sequences from Configuration Manager, and we saw these 3 task sequences in Configuration Manager. So we have access to those. They get synchronized through the caching service into the Configuration Manager portal. But let me show you how easy it is to create a task sequence. So I'm going to go ahead and load Chrome, just as a different browser, and I'm logged in as that same user that we just saw in commence. So if I go to the upper right, you'll see here that it's user 2. So it's my desktop support person. So I'm not being an admin right now. Here's my workstations. I only have these 3 workstations right now. If I go to task sequences, I gave him access to 2 of those task sequences to install Windows 10 as a bare metal scenario, and then do to be able to deploy an in-place upgrade of Windows 10. And if I look at MDT roles, I'll only see the workstations MDT role and not the server's MDT role. Remember when we were in commence, he only showed the workstation software. It didn't show the server software. Okay, so now let's go ahead and create a new task sequence. So I gave him access to that. So new task sequence. Now I'm going to create an OSD task sequence. And I'm going to call this Windows 10 with Remote Manage. Now, if I look at these tabs, notice that if I go to images, it has no OS image. It's got both these checkboxes enabled. It's got x86 boot image. Didn't have anything set for Windows settings. It's got the nothing really set for my domain or any of these other tabs. So let's go back here to task sequence. Let's go ahead and load a template. So as I mentioned last week, templates are preset settings, or a file that basically has all these settings preset for us. So I'm going to go ahead and load one that I gave access to this user called Windows 10 Deployments. And I click load. And now let's see what happens. It just refreshed, so it loaded that template. Now my support person doesn't have to pick the image. It already knows to do a 64-bit boot image. It's using the Windows 10 Enterprise image. It turned off configuring task sequence for use with BitLocker because it's a Hyper-V, which is not supported there. Here's my Windows settings. Here's my network settings that I want to have, my domain settings. All I have to do is add in my password for my administrator account. Here's the install client configuration. By default, I want to do USMT, although maybe I don't want to do window or user settings because it's a bare metal scenario, but I get to control that. Here's how I want to interact with software updates. In this case, I said I wanted to add remote manage, so let me go ahead and add that in. And I don't want to save my password that I just typed in. So that's all the harder it is to create a task sequence. I just name it, I load the template, and then make any adjustments that I need to, that I feel is appropriate for that specific scenario. I don't have to remember all those different settings. Think about if you can think about it in your mind, how complex the OSD task sequence creation process is in Configuration Manager Console, walking through all those wizard pages and having to set all those values, answer all those questions. You just create a template one time and you load it when you want it. So a very, very simple, easy thing to do. So now if I go back to task sequences, so it takes me there. It's not there yet, so because it's creating this task sequence in Configuration Manager. If I go ahead and hit refresh, it's probably there now. And there's my task sequence, Windows 10 with Remote Manage. Now to deploy it, I just do a right click, deploy software, and I'll go ahead and do a standard software deployment. I think I showed you this last week with as a help desk person. There's my task sequence I want to deploy. I'll go to the Windows 10 deployments collection. I'm not going to add a computer because I'm going to be doing bare metal. And now on the deployment tab, again, I want to have all these settings set the way I want them to be set. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and load a deployment template for OSD task sequences. And now I may have, here's some checkboxes that are enabled appropriately. My deployment setting, this is now required. And I want to do it as soon as possible. So I have templates for creation of software, whether in this case it's task sequences. I have templates for deployment of software, in this case, task sequences. So very, very cool and very easy for you to be able to hand out the ability of doing this work to your other IT staff, so you don't have to do all the work yourself. Now, just to show you how simple it is to control that, if I go back to as my administrator, and if I hit refresh here, that task sequence will appear here as well. There's the Windows 10 Remote Manage. But I want to go to Security Settings. And I just go ahead and take my security group, which is Desktop Support. And then I just go ahead and on the Browse section, I just say, okay, they have access to seeing task sequences and MDT roles, whatever options I want. And then for new task sequence, I just designate whether they can create task sequences, software task sequences or OSD task sequences. Generic is the old term we have. That actually should be out of here. What we have now is software task sequences. So if you do new OSD and software task sequence. So you just designate what type of task sequences you want this support members of the support group to have access, or global group have access to. And that's all you have to do. Then if you want to do instance rights for what task sequences they have access to, like I didn't give them rights to the commence deployments, you just go to permissions and you control via instance rights whether they have, which again, security groups have access to which objects, task sequences, MDT roles, and then as we already saw, the OS deployment settings. So the OSD templates, not operating system deployment task sequence templates, a little bit different, but OSD templates, the number sequences, and then the organizational units. So pretty easy to configure that and control who has access to what. And then you get to control, again, which users have access to commence. It's just, again, it's just another security setting that you go ahead and enable so that I can now control whether or not John has access to commence, so that when John brings his laptop and plugs it into my corporate network, should he be able to get one of my task sequences being my boot image as well as my operating system image. If I don't want that to happen, then I don't give him access through the CMP, and he won't be able to do so through what we're doing. So pretty cool scenario there. So I think it's a lot easier for you to do your management. Now, we talked about reporting. So here you can see I got another computer added in. It was 6 earlier, and right now it still has just one Windows 10 Enterprise client. This will change to 2 once that client gets registered. But go to reporting. So we want to do some monitoring, and if you want to monitor inside the task, a couple different ways inside CMP. If you go to the deployments node, here you'll see here's our install Windows 10 task sequence that we deployed. So right now we have no status. We're waiting for status to come back from Config Manager. But if you want reports, you go to reporting, and you notice there's no reports in here for task sequences. As an admin or somebody has rights, I just do a link reports. I expand out my categories, go down to the task sequence. So maybe if I go to task sequence deployments, and let's take all task sequence deployments. Take that one, add it in. And now I just go ahead and right click and give permissions to whoever I want to have access to run this report. And if I want my desktop support guy to be able to do so, click view. He's now got rights. Go back over to his access, go to reports, and now that report will appear. And I just go ahead and run that report. And here it's just pure SRS reporting. So it's the same reporting that you would have from inside the Configuration Manager console. So it's just a delay there as to get SRS to do its work. So there's it's not any CMP here stuff here, just loading in the reports, and there you have. You can see that install Windows 10. I can drill in on that. And here you can see it's running on one client, so 100% is running. I drill in on that. And then we'll see WKS001, and it's on the step setup Windows and Configuration Manager, so the operating system is installed. It's on step 20 I think it's 24 steps total they would have. So again, we're at the point of Configuration Manager doing its work. And in the Configuration Manager itself, as I mentioned there, you go to the monitoring workspace, you have the deployments node, and then here's the install Windows 10. So there was no status in CMP because I haven't done any summarization. So let me go do a summarization here and see if we have any status back, which we should have. So let that set for, usually it's 17 seconds if your site's not too busy. And it's been about that. So now we hit a refresh. And now we see we're 100% complete now. And then you can click View Status. And we're complete. There's WKS001. And here's that More Details button I mentioned. Click More Details. Gives you some basics, but now go to Status. And here you see all the different steps. And you see we're step 25. And the last one we had was 20 when the report ran. So, and you can see it wasn't very long after that same minute time frame that thing's completed. And that's that method. Or again, under monitoring, you can go ahead and load that same report if you want to, or any other of the task sequence reports. So I went to this one, deployments. I did all task sequence deployments, and I ran this report inside the CMP. And there you see it succeeded. So just a matter of waiting for the last couple of things to happen. And that has completed, and now it's step 26 where we had 20 in ours, and again, just at the time when the report ran. So now, once this computer goes ahead and reports in, it reported as a client now, and it's a appropriate version of the client. Once it does heartbeat discovery, which it should have done now, we'll have heartbeat DDR. There you go. It's not there yet. I have to summarize, and then we'll have our operating system information. And then of course we're waiting for hardware inventory. So you see it's reporting it as a Windows 10 device. If I want to go over to monitoring, last thing I'll do, I know we're towards the top of the hour, so we'll go ahead and end this guy in just a second. Go to client status, and I'll just do a refresh on client status because that will get that heartbeat DDR value updated in the console. Because you can see right now the last time it summarized was an hour and a half ago and only summarizes once a day, so I'm forcing it. So you get this to go to 4:59 p.m. There's 4:59 p.m. And now if I go back over here, and now you can see that my heartbeat DDR is registered. And it's in UTC time, so that's why it shows tomorrow morning. One or this morning. Interesting, 9:58 a.m. Okay, and obviously no hardware inventory yet, no client client health evaluation report back. And then in the CMP, they go back here as that user. And then as soon as this guy gets synchronized through the configuration manager portal, it's got a syncing process, which I've got set for 10 minutes. So within 10 minutes, go over to the computers and do a refresh. You would see that computer, oh, there it comes. So it's in there now. So just waiting for that final sync to include the operating system information, which this comes from hardware inventory. So we need to wait for hardware inventory to come to go ahead and update that. So that's the process. So we think that's a pretty easy process. So again, the commence solution gives you the operating system deployment front end to help control that operating system imaging interface for a probably not an end user, but more likely your IT staff, your desktop support team, or maybe server support team. So that's a great interface to give you that interaction. And then showed you how easy it is to create new task sequences. I just showed you an operating system deployment task sequence, but there's also software-based task sequences, which are the old generic ones from Config Manager. And then load a template to go ahead and preset all those values for you. And you just deploy that task sequence, again, using the CMP and setting all those values that you want, either manually or more appropriately from a template again. So that gives you great support there. So just a quick summary, then we'll jump on over to the questions to see if anybody has any questions. So System Center Configuration Manager is a fantastic product. Like I said before, I've been around it for 20 years. I know at Ignite, the product group were just talking about their 25th anniversary. Well, the product hasn't been out 25 years. That's since they started working on the product back in 1992. It first shipped as SMS 1.0 in 1995. But I've been working with it since 1994. So I've been working with it for over 23 years now, and it's fantastic. I love it. But you shouldn't be on any other version of Configuration Manager other than the current branch release, and you want to try and keep your current branch up to date, which is very, very easy to do. Now, Windows 10 obviously is the newest, and according to Microsoft, what we heard, the last client operating system. They just keep iterating on Windows 10. It's easy to get there using Configuration Manager with that in-place upgrade or the bare metal scenario. And it's easy to manage once you get there. You just have to decide if you want to manage through Windows Intune or Microsoft Intune or through Configuration Manager or both with the new co-management process coming out. Now, to help you extend the reach of your Configuration Manager implementation throughout your organization, you could look at implementing the Cireson portal for Configuration Manager. And I showed you how easy and securely it was to go ahead to deploy Windows 10 in a bare metal scenario as I did. But you could also deploy your in-place upgrade task sequence as well. If you want to try it out yourself, there's a download of a free community version you can get. Now, the community version does not support commence because you can't do any deployments with the community version, but it lets you have a view into your Configuration Manager environment. You look at inventory summary, you can look at your computers, your users, your task sequences, your software, but you can't run reports, you can't look at deployment status, and you can't do any deployments or create any new objects. So what you probably want to do there, if you really want to try out commence, is then request from this URL at the bottom of the screen, request a trial key. So you can go to that URL there, cireson.com, config manager-portal, or just go to cireson.com and you'll be able to easily find the Configuration Manager portal. And you can request a trial key, which will work in the community version and will turn it from a read-only version into a fully functioning version that's just time-bombed for 30 days. And then you'll be able to try it out in your own lab environment to see how it goes. And then if you like it, anything you've done there, when you purchase the product, you just punch in a new key, and that will convert you from the trial version over to a fully functioning version, and you'll be off and running with them, just keeping all the security settings you set, as well as your any task sequences or any other software or any deployments you created. All those will be maintained when you go from the community version to the trial version, from the trial version over to the fully functioning version. And if you have any questions or need any assistance, I think Joe's on the line now, so Joe would be there from our partner Dilignet to go ahead and help you out, so you can talk to those guys over in the Australian market. You can also contact us, and we can go ahead and route you out to them to get the interaction with them. So. With that, it's question and answer time. So if you guys have any questions, please feel free to go ahead and type them into the questions panel, and then myself and or Joe, whoever's appropriate, can go ahead and answer those for you. If there aren't any, we'll go ahead and we'll wait here a moment to see if anybody does have any questions. If there aren't any, we can go ahead and we'll have anything in the recorded session. We'll get that posted up again later on this week for you. Joe, did you have anything you wanted to offer?
No, just once again, while people are thinking about their questions, thank you for facilitating another session, and I guess we'll look forward to next week's as well. And yeah, if there's any other questions, feel free for anyone to reach out to ourselves or via yourself, and we will answer what we can.
Yep, and if you need to contact them, there's just dilignet.com. So pretty simple to get access there, and we're Cireson.com. But feel free to go ahead and type up any questions you got right now in the questions panel. We can go ahead and handle those. Again, next week's session, same time, same place, will be on software distribution. So talking about some of the different options you have available for deploying software through Configuration Manager, because there are a lot of different ways now, especially with that brand new feature that they added in 1706, being the run scripts feature. So Grant's asking, will the first session recording be available? Yeah, it is posted already. So it is up on that Vimeo site. So just for reference, let me go ahead and load Edge, and let me bring it over to my main monitor since I'm sharing it. So go there, and you just go to, I cannot type and talk at the same time, vimeo.com/Team Cireson. So go to this URL here, vimeo.com Team Cireson, and then it'll pop up with the most recent webinars. So here's the one I did last week for the partnering with Dilignet that we recorded. I've also done the same thing with CTech or CT Global as well as Netrix. That one looks like they don't have it posted up here yet, but they did part 2 this session with Kent, and then we'll record part 3s. Next week as well on software distribution. We'll get it posted up. So as soon as we're done with this, I'll get the recording converted over, and then I'll hand it off to our gal who does that loading, and she'll get it uploaded, I'm sure, tomorrow. I must not have told her about the one from Netrix that's done. Otherwise, that recording should be up there. They're usually pretty quick, but you'll see tons of different webinars out here. In fact, here's that 3-part session I did. Well, the next one's on the next page. But you can see part 1 was migration best practices that rolled over to part 2, and then part 3 is managing Windows 10 post-migration. So those are webinars I did a while ago. So you can go ahead and access any of those webinars, or again, as you're asking Grant, last week's is right here. So you can go ahead and access it. So that's a very good resource as well for you. So thanks for the question. Anybody with anything else? You're welcome, Grant. If nothing else, then we're well past our top of the hour. So thanks again to everybody for hanging out and spending a little time with us. I know it's your Tuesday morning there, and hopefully this did not impact your workday too much. So appreciate the time, and look forward to seeing you all next week again when we wrap up this series. Again, same time, Tuesday morning for you guys on enterprise software distribution. And we'll get this session recording up on the website again, hopefully tomorrow. But just look back at the vimeo.com Team Cireson, and you'll be able to find that in the next day or so. So with that, thanks, Joe, for hopping on. I know you had a problem getting in there, but thanks for hopping on and being there for support. So thanks for our partnership with those guys and moving forward. So you guys all have a fantastic rest of your Tuesday, and I'm going to go ahead and close this out. So I'll stop the recording, and we'll get this guy posted up there in the next day or so for you. You guys all have a great rest of your day, and thanks. Appreciate your time. Bye now.